Afrique Média. Le monde, c'est nous.
Hello?
Hello, you're on the program. Good day to you, sir.
I very appreciate it. I very appreciate all what you are talking about it. Good day and good day to all the viewers of Afrique Media. Thank you. Thank to Africa.
The Chadian government has recently called for the return of
This day, with the fight against terrorism in the Sahel region, Mahamat Idris Deby, leader of Chad's military government, has decided to withdraw part of his troops from the troubled three-border region of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, where a surge in violence has cost thousands of lives. The decision, he says, is to better adapt to the strategic organization of the terrorists. The redeployment of these 600 out of 1,200 troops stationed there since February comes when France too is planning to reduce its 5,000 troops by half. What impact is this going to have on the fate of the poor masses living in the G5 Sahel nations of Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mauritania and Chad itself at a time when there is an upsurge in violent attacks which are already crossing to Chad's borders with Nigeria and Cameroon? What appreciation of Mahamat's handling of terrorism since taking over after the demise of his father on battlefield? We talk about this on today's edition of Views on the Continent.
Good day and good day to all the viewers of Afrique Media. Thank you, Afrique Media. Thank you for what you are doing. Thank you, Africa.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on today's edition of Views on the Continent. Apologies for the late start. Talking on the fight against terrorism today in the G5 Sahel region, Chad has decided to redeploy part of its troop from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and this is actually going to affect in a greater way the security situation in that part of the country, which is already suffering a great deal of security troubles in the G5 Sahel. So, talking about this today, we are equally going to look at how Mahamat Idris Deby, son of the late Marshal Idris Deby Itno, is handling terrorism in the G5 Sahel, noting that Chad has been noted for its incumbent and its presence in the fighting terrorism in this part of the region. So we're looking at that today, and of course we have a guest joining me live from the United States. It is Dr. Eddie Eric. You're joining from the United States. You are a professor of global politics at the Thomas Jefferson University of Philadelphia. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you much for having me.
All right, thank you, Dr. Eddie Eric. We will be diving into the discourse after getting to listen to this paper detailedly compiled by Emanuela Gnocchi. She puts a decor on what we are talking about today, the security situation in the Sahel region. We talk about that, and Emanuela Gnocchi gives us a report.
The Chadian government has recently called for the return of half her troops from the multinational G5 Sahel forces in the affected three-border region of Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso, where violence have claimed thousands of lives. Over the weekend, the nation's spokesperson Abdurrahman Kalomala said that the redeployment is strategy to better adapt to the organization of the terrorists. Earlier this year, Chad has deployed 1,200 soldiers to subdue the violence caused by rebel fighters in the 5 Sahel regions, including Mauritania. Abdurrahman explained that the 600 troops have heavy weapons were pulled out in a bid to hasten movement. According to reports, the actions will greatly affect the 3 border regions alongside central Mali, since they have sustained thousands of human losses and damages. The government of Chad said it is still firmly committed to fighting the rebels. The late President Idriss Deby Itno, who was a great ally to France and other foreign nations in his quest to fight terrorism but was killed in April during a fierce exchange with rebels. After his death, the security issues in the region deteriorated and his son, Mohamed Idriss Deby, has been trying to continue from where the father stopped, which has not been easy up to this point.
Lanyoki for that report. Joining me back in the studio. This is Views on the Continent, and we are going to 15 hours. 15 o'clock or 15 hours GMT rather. So we are beginning with you, Dr. Eddie Eric. You know, Chad, which is up till now or which has up till now been imposing herself in the fight against terrorism in the Sahel region, has decided to redeploy part of the troops that were stationed there since February, and it is an act which we must say will further jeopardize the security situation in that country. What do you think?
Very definitely, yes. Anytime you have in the case and matter of protecting civilians, populations against terrorist activities in this region of Africa, which for the past, 6 years have suffered, with the brunt of a terrorist attack. Very definitely, the decision of China to withdraw or scale down, its troops from this area is going to have some very adverse consequences, especially that Chad has been known for being the lead country and actually for carrying the burden of the counter terrorist operations in this area of Africa, again with Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We see the first thing that will happen, I believe, will be again the state of mind of the population in these areas. Every single day, when you tune in to listen to the news, you hear about the number of people who are killed in villages. I have not listened to the news this morning to know again, what is happening in the Tilaberi area in Niger, or what is happening again at the border in Mali, or even in Burkina Faso. And then at the present, we are also talking about a possible, threat in again, Cote d'Ivoire. All these areas, will be interconnected. So I do believe that, this strategic redeployment of the troops, from the lead the country that has faced, terrorist attacks, in this area, is very definitely going to bear some different types of consequences in terms of strategic, repositioning, geostrategic, interests, I would say.
You see, it is important to note equally that the 1,200 troops or contingent present in the Sahel Multi-Dimensional Task Force was taxed there since February by late President Idriss Deby Itno. And after his death on war front, we should equally precise that his son Mahamat Idriss Deby thinks that the number which was deployed there by his father was too much, and he decides to cut down. Does the action of this present government not seem to contradict the efforts of the previous government and the previous government of his father, who was, of course, calling on other African leaders to assist him in the fight against insecurity and equally in the deployment of more troops, which he thinks or which he thought were very few, and that African countries were supposed to deploy more for the security of the Sahel region?
I don't think personally that there is a contradiction. Rather, I see a continuation or actually implementation of what what it is to be the father plan to do. Let us not forget that several articles were reported that when Idris Deby the father was alive, he did complain about the number of troops and the fact that Chad was shouldering the heaviest burden of the counter-terrorist attack in this area. He even called also for a redeployment or for scaling down the troops. Remember that Idris Deby, the father, before he passed away, also in 2020, actually talked about Chadian troops not dying outside of Chad anymore, which means that the redeployment was going to take place for those troops to secure more within Chad than that. So Based on those facts, based on those reports that we have, based on those statements made by the former or the late President Idris Deby, I believe that what we are seeing now in terms of the scaling down and redeployment of troops, as they said, it is to adjust to the organization of terrorist organization is in a clear alignment with the philosophy or the ideas or the line addicted by the father before his unfortunate death earlier this year.
We are now seeing the redeployment of Chadian troops from some of the Sahel countries. Could this be a sign of disengagement by the new Chadian government? Could this prompt like fears of Chadian withdrawal from other African countries or from other countries where it has deployed its troops for military assistance?
I don't think that what we are going very definitely towards a disengagement. Why? Because the terrorism remains a threat, and then Chad is also part of the countries that are heavily, or if you want, very impacted by these terrorist activities. That's number one. But I believe that we want to look at it from the perspective of countries national interest. I believe that it is to be Mahatma, the son, is aware with his government of what now are the identified national interests of a child. Let us not forget that. And based on those national interests, of course, this redeployment or this realignment will be key in indeed. Second thing that I want to say in here also is that very definitely this decision to scale down in terms of troops is a calling or putting again is a wake-up call for the other nation of the G5 Sahel to maybe step up the game, but also to reassess what is really happening in the region. You know that beyond those countries, beyond or in addition to those countries, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, and Chad, you do also have a presence of quote-unquote partner organizations. France has a heavy presence in those countries, as we said. At least 4 major French operations are in Chad, around Fayalajo, are in Niger, in Mali, with all these operations, but yet we continue to witness those deadly attacks. It means that something is not working. For me, I also see, and that's the third point, this decision of Mahatma, this new president of Chad, somewhere in alignment with what the president of current leader of Mali has decided to do in terms of their priorities when it comes to combating and fighting terrorism in the region, and of course, we're protecting the lives of all the civilians, those villagers who are dying, like cows that are being slaughtered every single day. Another thing that I want to say, let us not forget that not only you have the French presence in there, but you do also have the presence, not much said, but of U.S. troops or U.S. military presence as well in those areas. So I believe that this execution of the decision, the feeling, the strategic repositioning of the troops from Chad, this again is the lead country in terms of the G5 Sahel, is calling for a complete maybe overall or realignment of what is happening in that region in terms of combating terrorist insurgency and making sure again that populations are safe to work, to till the land and to live.
All right, now many think that Muhammad Idris Deby is being more strategic and tactical in his way of handling the security situation in the region, and most at times we will have to do the comparison between Muhammad and the Marshal Idris Deby. Is it your own point of view?
Well, it is a new leader who is also trying to impose his own mark, we are not going necessarily to see the father doing, like the son doing exactly what the father did. Both of them are Idris Deby Itno, but one was, one is Mahatma, the other one is dead, and then this young leader is trying to also impose his mark. Let us not forget that, this gentleman is 37 years of age, which I call, probably the generation Z or the whichever generation you want to call them. So I believe that, he is also trying, we should not eliminate the fact that he has enough room to impose his mark, his direction, his own leadership, his own vision. The same we see with Assimi Goïta in Mali, for instance. So very definitely, we should give room to understand that, and also not forget that even though we are dealing with the countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and all of them, those African countries that are quote unquote, developing countries, each of those countries have national interests that can intersect also with their regional interests. Today, Chad's national interest or part of Chad's national interest is the security in the region, which means that Chad can neither withdraw completely from these anti-terrorist operations, because we know when the terrorist organization or the terrorist organizations are striking, population flee, refugees, move from borders to borders, and that creates another set of humanitarian issues as well. The best thing to do, of course, is to have those joint forces and truly identify the terrorist organization and cells. What are the factors that are breeding on that and addressing them? And I believe that this is what certainly, from a clear African perspective, those leaders are trying to do again in Mali, and today with what we are seeing in Chad with the execution of what was announced, almost a year ago. Now, Chad cannot continue to bear by itself, this heavy burden of fighting terrorism in this region.
All right. Of course, you're right that most of these countries equally have their individual and personal interests, and of course the interest of Chad is the security of the region. Now we are still looking at this security which is being jeopardized at the borders of Nigeria with Chad, Nigeria, Chad, and Cameroon. The insecurity keeps rising and rising. How do you think these other countries can help out, can assist, or how do you think, first of all, they have been working towards curbing this insecurity situation at the borders of Cameroon, Nigeria, and Chad?
The mounting insecurity that we see at the border of these three countries, epitomizes that the question of security in Africa in general. Not long ago, and I think I'm trying for my iPad to find and retrieve a comment made by an African leader, was this person, on this particular issue not long ago. When you see again, the number of people that are dying on a daily basis because of these terrorist attacks, very definitely we can come to the conclusion that despite the efforts, of course, we know we cannot discredit completely, any effort being put together. If not, it will be not encouraging the soldiers that are actually committing their lives for, again, the safety, the interests of their nation. But there is a feeling of failure. Why is that? In those areas that, what Dr. Gary Bush is particularly describing as areas that can be with very difficult because of the deployment of combat armory and vehicles because of the desert, the sands, and all that. But at the same time, it is also very difficult for terrorist organizations to continue to operate when they face a steep resistance from national troops from different countries. I believe that the other countries, therefore, beyond those other countries, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Chad, the African Union itself, is called to tax killing here, or other sub-regional organizations are also called to tax killing there. I do believe that there is the need for a true reassessment and a true Pan-African vision to be on the desk. We know that Idris Deby, the father, has a strong ties with France. Of course, preserving also his presidency, fighting internal rebel groups against his regime, but at the same time also contributing to anti-terrorist operations on three fronts. For Chad itself, it became a very heavy burden. That's what we're talking about. We also know that at some point the Cameroonian forces, did a good job against, Boko Haram. So as Nigeria, that is one of the best trained, forces in Africa. But it is for me the way the time to again the call to tax the African Union or any other sub-regional organization to really take their position when it comes to how Africa itself can start, working against this terrorist organization. I start somewhere doubting the sincerity of the presence of the French troops. I told you, Payalajo in Chad, Niger, around in Jamena, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, you have a French military presence, and over the years, we see that what terrorism is not being defeated. There are a lot of questions even here to raise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now we are talking of insecurity, and you talked about insecurity being a major problem in Africa, looking at the African Union, also the efforts of the African Union. Now, there is this pressurizing issue that's been happening in neighboring Chad, in Nigeria, with the excess and random kidnapping of school children. What do you think is the level of struggle by the Nigerian government to curb this rampant exercise of these bandits?
You know that one of the things that Dr. Gary Bush also in talking about the U.S. Wars or presence in the Sahel or in this part of Africa is a saying which is also interesting is there are other factors want to look at. The number of troops that we have in all of these countries, the ways in which those troops are trained. The other thing is how the logistics, how they are equipped, right? Military equipment as well, which means transmission, and I will also call coordination. Not only you have those very huge territories with huge populations that sometimes are very difficult to patrol, even from the inside, not to talk about the trans-border movement of individuals, and of course, of terrorist organizations that sometimes are also very difficult to track. Another factor that we also wanted to look at is what is the organic. And what I mean organic here is what is the support that those different cells are also gaining from certain population. There is a network, or there is some very intersecting factors in there, bordering on religion, bordering on cultural values, bordering on ethnic, rivalries in some of those countries that actually are also breeding and giving room for these bandits, as you said, to operate as well, in addition to the weakness of either the military or the administrative apparatus in each of those countries as well. Look, in the case of Cameroon, for instance, not only you have within, some sort of a political instability with what we call, awkwardly, the Anglophone Cameroon, against a so-called Francophone Cameroon, whereas we do have African cultural identities that bring us together more than those divisive, Western identities that, we are getting. This is also creating some sort of separation or disintegration that, of course, what terrorist organization and bandits can also build on. Today, in this area of globalization, this era of globalization that we are talking about, I am not sure that most of the African countries have been able to deploy, right, their wings and their security apparatus to cope with certain hidden or underground, or let's say black market, businesses that continue also to feed those terrorist organizations. Because the question that I continue to raise, and I did raise, earlier in my first previous answer, is to why is it with the presence of all our quote unquote, allies, friends, and the United States who have their presence in these areas, the terrorists seem to be gaining ground, seem to be continuing their work, unabated, and population are still suffering. So here's, for me, a multiplicity and intersecting factors that explain what you just said, and the fact that what those countries are still suffering, and Nigeria is still again having some school children that are kidnapped the same way years ago. You remember Boko Haram took
Mm-hmm.
all the Chibok girls, for instance.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Eddie Eric. Let's get a break and give an opportunity equally to our callers to give their own opinion and their views on regarding the subject matter of the day. The lines are open for you to call us and tell us what you think is the way forward with the fight against terrorism in the Sahel region after Mahamat Idris Deby decides to redeploy half of his troop that's been stationed in the Sahel region since February under the order of his father, late Marshal Idris Deby Itno. So, what do you think is the way forward? How do you think these African countries can fight against insecurity in this part of the country? We are looking at that, and we leave our lines open for your calls, your contributions, your participations, and of course your views on the continent this afternoon. So, while waiting for your signals, I come back to you, Dr. Eddie Eric. Now, we are looking at redeployment of troops by countries which have been deploying their troops into the multidimensional task force. And we are equally talking of France, which has been present in the Sahel region for years now. France is equally talking of redeploying its troops. I believe that many people are eager to understand what strategic method they think it is to redeploy troops at a time and a moment when the country is still, or those parts of the region are still not secured. What is actually the strategic organization behind the redeployment of troops by France and Chad and the various other countries which are giving in a helping hand?
Well, the first answer I want to give is on the side of France. I want to talk about a suspicion in there, right? There are so many things. I believe that we wanted to take into consideration. We know the recent, I will say, confrontation or désamour, if you allow me to use this French word, between France and the Malian government, for instance, regarding what security, the French presence, and how the operation in Barkhane, for instance, what is being conducted, and the fact that again what populations are dying in there. So for me, it calls for number one, suspicion. We are yet to have a clarity, I will say, in terms of this strategic, repositioning of the troops or the decision to scale down. But at the same time, again, let us not forget that, in those countries, there continue to be a French military presence. We have not heard of France saying, okay, we are dismantling our military bases in the Fayalajo in Chad. We have not heard of the United States saying, hey, we are completely living the same way we are living, Afghanistan in Kabul a few past days with this chaos that we are seeing. And matter of fact, this is something that, we also want to compare those situations with. What kind of chaos, what kind of fear, what kind of mental, instability will be created in the minds of all these populations. And that's where, I continue to repeat that because that's where my heart is, because it is very painful, very saddening every single day when you tune in to listen to the news from that part of Africa and you hear of civilian populations dying in mass days after days. Is very heartbroken. Okay. So I believe that, again, there is number one suspicion. But number two, when it comes for Chad, with strategy, recent announcement to redeploy its troops, I really want to invite people to look at it from a very realistic, realist perspective. What is it that, what the Chadian government today has identified to be its priority or its national security priorities, and to what extent, what this redeployment is aligning or allowing Chad to achieve that purpose. Let us not forget that, these national interests, again, are number one, domestic, but also they intersect with the security issues in the entire region, because at the end of the day, the borders are so porous. That's another factor that, what Chad cannot completely cut ties from any of the three military operations that, they are participating in, including the G5 Sahel.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Eddie Eric, for that take. We have signal of a caller present and waiting to give his view. Our lines are open. You're live on the program Views on the Continent. Let's hear you. Hello. There's a caller online.
Hello, Rita. Hello, viewers of Active Media.
Hello. You're live on the program. Let's hear you. Your name and where you're calling from, please.
The approach in fighting international terrorism in the world must be handled with tact and care. We've seen that it's not necessarily a military solution that can solve the problem, but it would have been a different approach that nations should use, or superpowers should use in tackling international terrorism. Now, the approach of Muhammad, the current president of Chad, is different from that of his father. Now, we've seen that international terrorism is a threat to human life, especially in Africa and in Asia. Now, talk about Afghanistan. We've seen that it was very difficult for the Americans to defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan because they were there to fight against international terrorism. It was very difficult for them. We saw that after the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan, the insurgent, the Taliban, took over power within 3 weeks, meaning that the government was so weak militarily, or meant the Americans did not do enough to train the Afghan soldiers, or they did their best to train the Afghan soldiers, but they were weak. I was saying in Mali, where France is trying to withdraw her forces from Mali. France has operated in that region for long, in the Sahel, trying to defeat the insurgents there. She operated in the Balkan War, but was not all easy. And other countries like Chad, Niger, the Burkina Faso, they've tried to bring troops so that the insurgents can be defeated in that region. And we are foreseeing that if France finally withdraw her forces from that region, the insurgent will take over that power in Mali. We've seen the target regions of Ethiopia or of Eritrea, where the Tigris region of Ethiopia is still holding strong to hold over power to make that region, the Tigris region, independent in Ethiopia. We've seen in southern Cameroon where the Amazonian force fighters are holding it strong to make their independence. We've seen in Nigeria where Boko Haram is holding strong in the northern region, and all over many places, Eritrea and various of media. So to say that the approach in fighting international terrorism should be handled differently, because if military option is always used, that will not be a solution. Just the example I've cited in Afghanistan, where the American swift left and the Taliban took over very swift. Within 2 weeks, they've taken over the power, and we find the president fleeing. That would be the same approach in most of these areas, that because it's a lesson to most of the area, because the terrorists in most of the regions are seen, they are very happy for what has happened. So they are all looking for opportunity that the major power who is spearheading the move, if he left, now they have a leeway way now to overthrow the government. So the president of Chad now had a different approach from that of his father. His father's approach was very aggressive, but since as if his son's approach is since as if it is not so aggressive, but tact, but with tact and careful. Thank
you, Mr. Shu, for your contribution. Let me come to you, Dr. Eddie Eric. You got the contribution of the caller. What's your impression about the various examples that he cited?
Question about the various examples. They all share one thing in common: is a question of violence, right? Political violence or global political violence, as we'll call it, with different, reason factors. For instance, what is happening in the Tigrayan region in the war in Ethiopia is not necessarily a question of terrorism in there, but there is also global political violence involved in that as well. Even when we look at Nigeria, Boko Haram, or what is happening in Mali and the different approaches in there, yes, they global political violence, but if we want to analyze the factors that are breeding, all those things, we'll see some differences here and there. But at the same time, as I said, the commonalities of all these examples that, what the caller gave is that, what they are all, what global political violence, number one. Number two, they are also pinpointing the weakness of state security apparatuses in each of those countries. Anytime you have a terrorist organization kind of having a sway or dominating or continuing their activities without being crushed or continuing to instill fears in the population, it means that the security apparatuses in those countries is very weak. Matter of fact, I'm going to agree with the caller that says that the approach to fight terrorism in Africa needs a complete overhaul. If I wanted to lend him that word, he talks about changing the approach. I will say yes, it is a really time for the African Union and the sub-regional African organizations to really come up with some African-oriented solutions to deal with this rise of global violence in our respective countries. And I believe that it is doable. I also do agree with him. Let us not forget that, again, the redeployment of troops that, Chad has announced, the Lake Chad area is of a particular importance, very strategic, geopolitical importance for Chad. So I will not be surprised that, the withdrawal of the troops or the scaling down will be to increase the number of troops around this area of Lake Chad, which is providing quite much of economic activities for this country.
Okay. Now let's look at France's presence with the Barkhane in the G5 Sahel. The Barkhane has been there for many years, and most of the times we get reports of the French soldiers equally acting like they're equally part of the actions against the people of the G5 Sahel. Some could be speculations, others could be true, but many think that the presence of the French Barkhane force is not needed in the G5 Sahel. Is it your opinion?
I told you earlier somewhere, how many minutes ago that, I'm very suspicious of the French presence in Mali, especially. The same way, based on the suspicious and very clear, actually, presence of French troops in interfering in African politics and in the destabilization of many countries, Cote d'Ivoire, since the 1960s. So today, I believe, I do believe, with the knowledge that I have, that I am very suspicious of what the French, with their troops, stationed, with a part of Operation Barkhane, part of Operation Licord, back in 5 years ago in Cote d'Ivoire, and all these military bases that they have implanted in those countries, again, from Chad, Mali, Niger, etc., etc. I am very suspicious of the true or the sincerity of the action in there to bring stability and security to our population. And it means what it means.
Okay. So now let's look now at the way forward. How do you think most of these African countries can chip in a helping hand, like to fight against insecurity, noting that the African Union had talked of the year 2020 to silence the guns. So how do you think the countries have been working towards silencing the guns, which of course the 2020 has passed, and now we are still looking at the other Agenda 2063. How do you see the African Union fighting towards working towards silencing the guns in Africa?
one thing calls for another. There needs to be a real commitment and a practical commitment, I will say. It is good to announce that 2020 was going to be, let's silence the gun within the countries, across borders, and etc., etc. But let's move to another level. We have said it over and over. The African Union cannot continue to claim its autonomy when at the same time it is being partly or largely, I would say, was sponsored by the European Union. That's number one. Number two, we are talking about silencing the gun, making sure that our populations all over Africa are safe, and that what terrorist organizations are not getting any battle or getting any war, or are not actually curbing our respective national governments. It means that the democratic order or stability in those respective countries also needs to take place. When you have a political instability, when you have some kind of sometimes ill motivated ethnic rivalries, all those that can create very definitely the environment for terrorist cells or global political violence organizations, what to gain ground, and of course, what to prosper. We are talking about economy as well, right? Where does poverty? Where does unemployment, what fare? When it comes to recruiting young people to participate in these terrorist organizations. How are they indoctrinated? Then we also wanted to way forward also for the African Union to look at the respective partnerships that we have. In the case of the French-speaking African countries, we all know that from the start of their independence, they have signed quite a number of agreements with the former colonial power. One of them being, trusting France, if you want, with not only the economy but also with their security apparatuses. How many of those French-speaking African countries that do not have French military advisors to guide their countries, when we know that it is the same France that provide the intelligence, that provide at the same time also the means for either rebel organizations or for opposition groups, to take over if whoever is the sitting or the acting president is not of their likes. We talk about the presence of France Africa. All these are factors that I believe the African Union, our leaders, should take into consideration if we want to have a multidimensional, intersecting, approach to curbing down, violence in our countries. Then we are talking about terrorism, which is bloodshed, elimination of people. But let us not forget that it also has some economic dimension. We are talking about the black market. We are talking about access to oil. We are talking about access to natural resources. All those elements are escaping the control of those national governments in the northern part of Mali, in Niger, where Areva continued to export uranium. And let us also forget one thing. Under the difference, where U.S. presidents, from Bush the father, even under the Clinton administration, there has been a scaling up of a U.S. military presence and intervention in African countries to secure U.S. access to oil. Here, therefore, the number of factors that our leaders need to take into consideration and craft a better African-oriented approach. We cannot win this war against terrorism if we continue to rely on the external forces, our quote-unquote allies, only rely on them only for military equipment or for logistics. Maybe the time also has come to turn to other partners. I did say sometimes, earlier, not in this edition I mean, not today, but, China and Russia as two nuclear powers and members of the United Nations Security Council that weigh in the international political spectrum today have manifested their interest to also take part into global security. Maybe it is time also to really implement and bring these two countries also to the fold in there. If not, we are going to continue to see the same thing we're going to continue to see the same bloodshed and the same sadness that our unfortunate populations are suffering. They are already suffering from the brunt of poverty, the agricultural products that are not being well paid, and today also with this very awkward approach to resolve the COVID-19 crisis, for instance.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Eddie Eric, for your elaborate approach on that. Thank you very much, televiewers. Equally, this is where we are pulling in the curtains on today's edition of Views on the Continent, as we were analyzing the fight against terrorism in the Sahel region and the gesture by the Chadian president to redeploy his troops as a strategic method of fighting against terrorism in that part of the region. And in my company this afternoon was Dr. Eddie Eric, a professor at the University of Philadelphia. Thank you very much, Doctor, for being with me this afternoon. Okay, the pleasure was equally mine. Thanks, technicians, for the successful production of the program. Tomorrow is another edition with Clarice Widoven. Keep trusting the programs of your Pan-African television. Have a wonderful day.
I very appreciate it. I very appreciate all what you are talking about. Good day and good day to all the viewers of our media. Thank you, Africa. Thank you for what you are doing. Thank you, Africa.